Hey guys, Clay Westfall here with Bushwhacker Bait Company. Today I have a super awesome special guest for you, Bruce Norvell Jr. This guy has won countless tournaments. He's got a lot of money racked up from tournament winnings, and it's just awesome. What a great opportunity to have this guy next to me, a wealth of knowledge, and today we're going to talk about fishing your first couple tournaments. What is it that you should think about? How do you approach it? This is kind of geared more towards someone who fishes on the weekends, who's kind of getting into bass fishing, and it's new for them. They want to get involved and they want to compete. And the reason I'm bringing this guy is because he is really the expert, the local guy, the money winner. And so I'm going to kind of defer to him on this one and just kind of start it off and talk about a few different concepts of how you should prepare for your tournaments and where to go from here. So what do you think, Bruce?
Well, one thing you should consider is, what is the price of entry? Look to get a partner. If you're getting into this, you need to think about how you're going to split up your expenses. So look for somebody else that might have a little bit more experience in fishing, and maybe y'all can split some expenses. He has the boat, and you can help him with the expenses, gas, oil, tackle, stuff like that. That way you can learn on the water from somebody else. Something like that's very valuable.
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. I think especially when you're getting into it, it's hard to justify the cost of getting into some of these events. I know some of them that I fished back in the day. You can spend anywhere from $40 to I guess a couple $100, right?
Yeah, $500.
$500.
By the time you make it back home, gas and expenses.
And so it's nice to have, you can it's a little bit of a bargaining chip if you got, pretty good amount of skill and, you kind of work your way up to that, of course, but kind of just getting in there. Of course, the person you fish with, you can learn from. You can kind of share a lot of, it seems like a lot of guys have different techniques that they're go-to techniques, and so like someone like Bruce, is obviously going to fish quite a bit different than I am, and it's nice to be able to have that opportunity to kind of share information,
So one thing I took away, we went out earlier today on a local lake with Clay, and it's what is it, a highland reservoir?
I don't know that it's a highland. I would say it's more of a canyon style.
Canyon style. Very deep lake, very clear, something I'm not really used to fishing. Clay likes to fish with the spinning rod. The smallest rod I had is probably a medium heavy to a medium heavy fast rod, 6.5 foot, and I put 10-pound line on, and it really wasn't efficient enough today for the conditions that we were in. Clay, things that I take away from Clay, he fishes other lakes that I don't, that have clarity differences from what I experience. With his spinning rod compared to my bait cast rod, I wasn't able to get in certain areas that he was, but I'm paying attention to things that he's doing that I'm not familiar with, things that I can take away to other places very similar. So those are some things. When you're fishing with somebody else that has more experience or experience fishing other lakes like that, pay attention to things that they're doing. The other thing was the fish were kind of turned off. We got out there a little late, but we're paying attention to what the fish are doing. So, and he was able to make some adjustments, and I'm still learning. Why was he making those adjustments? So, I think those were big keys right there.
I think that's a great point. One of the things, I guess, there's something I do want to talk about is like, how do you, what should be your mindset for your first couple tournaments? Is it a deal where like, hey, of course you want to catch a limit of fish, like that's your priority? Is it like, hey, let's get as many bites as I can get and just try to put together at least a foundational bag of fish?
One thing that you can never replace is time on the water. So if nothing else, you need to go try to scout the lake any way possible. If you have to walk up a creek, granted that hopefully your boat can get in certain areas, but if you're able to walk up a creek somewhere or walk the bank, you need to be on the lake as much as possible and get an idea of what's going on the lake, morning, afternoon, late afternoon, as far as that goes. So something that I did, I always went to marinas. I fished marinas. I couldn't fish the front of the houseboat. Those are accessible to the boats. But you know what I was able to do? I was able to fish the back of the boats. And once again today, uh, we were fishing these, what are floating docks is what
Yeah,
they were?
yeah, floating dogs.
So Clay was able, with the spinning rod, was able to get way back into the shady areas. And, he got hooked up a few times a day. That's where it gets real tricky whenever you get down to your line, whether or not you're going to get that fish out. But, if you're able to fish off the bank, you got to think about how, from the main lake side, are you going to get under those docks. So, one, you're going to have a little lighter lure, lighter line. That way you can get it back there, from the boat side. So those are some really key things.
I think that's pretty good information. I think the angles that you take when talking about dock fishing, I think the angles that you approach at, if you know that everybody who rolls past a certain dock makes the same cast every time, your goal is to put that bait in a place where the fish is not used to seeing a bait. Just I want to go back to the tournament deal. I think that foundational bag, and I mean, you're really the tournament fishing expert here, but I think one of the things that you have pointed out, being on the lake is so important. Even if you're not super knowledgeable, you can kind of see which activity, like which areas have the most activity, where people who generally have the nicer boats, or that could be a little misleading at times, but like where are people focusing their energy? Are they fishing off the same points usually? Are they in the same part of the marina? Like I feel like, for me at least, when I started, I was trying to be really aware of like my surroundings and like who I was seeing fish where, try to get an idea that way.
Yeah, most definitely. The next thing is, this is where you're working on yourself. This is where you're working on your skills outside of the boat. So when you're inside the boat, you need to make that cast. Otherwise, if you didn't get some sort of time to yourself to practice on, flipping, making just certain casts, you won't backlash. So that's something that's extremely vital. Fishing with some partners, they may not take kindly to you backlashing or getting hung up all the time. These are things that obviously happen, but you need to always take time to sharpen your skills.
So, one of the things I've heard you talk about before that I think is super cool, it makes a lot of sense actually, is, your partner, your tournament fishing partner, you've told me that he does a lot of power fishing techniques. Obviously, I've seen you do a lot of really high level flipping and pitching and stuff. Like, I think something that's pretty neat is like you guys play off of each other with your techniques. Like you'll have him doing maybe throwing a crankbait and you're slowing down throwing something like a light Carolina rig or like a small jig. That's one of your go-tos I've seen you throw. What are your thoughts on that?
Just trying to show them something different. It actually, sometimes in a sense, it's actually almost very similar to what he's doing. And it's something that I've taken away from Clay here is the weight of your bait. It's either not falling fast enough, too fast. So there's some things that, once again, I've taken from other people, used, in my arsenal. But, me and my partner, we really try to fish the moment sometimes. You're out there in a tournament situation. You fished the week before, the 2 weeks before, great conditions, cold front. Sometimes you have to be willing to just ditch what you're doing and just totally change.
Yeah, I think that's such a great point. And I think one of the other things that I can say that I've learned from you fishing throughout the years is like, I came into, kind of the Central Texas deal from a West Coast perspective, and I had fished all my life in crystal clear water, and I came here, and that's really the benefit with tournaments or just having a fishing partner, seeing that other side and seeing what they do well and picking up on it. Like I remember coming here thinking, okay, how am I going to learn how to fish in stained water? And it was such an uncomfortable thing because I've seen you throw crankbaits that are like orange and yellow. I've seen you do like big spinner baits, chatter baits, and things that I wasn't normally used to throwing. I feel like I adapted so much from being around you, and that's what's so cool about fishing tournaments at the local level, especially if you're starting out, is you're exposed to all this different knowledge. I mean, you don't know if a person has a military background and they've moved around a lot and like they're relocated here from, Arkansas or, North Texas or the West Coast. It's just such a great melting pot to be able to pull those techniques from. And that's, I mean, to your credit, I have learned so much about staying fishing. I think really it's about putting yourself in uncomfortable situations so that you can maximize your potential. Like if you're always doing what you feel comfortable with, how can you grow, right?
Yeah, the best thing that you can grow from is when you do find a partner, someone to fish from the back of the boat. I tell you what, right now, that'll be the defining moment for you right there. Can you catch fish from the back of the boat? And that's something that me myself, I feel like the back of the boat's the front of the boat for me.
Mm.
So, and you just have to be able to work around that, and watch where your partner's throwing and pick off what he doesn't get to, as far as that goes.
So let me ask you this, Bruce. I mean, how do you feel like, you've obviously fished a lot of little local events. You've done quite a bit of regional stuff recently. You've been really successful at it. I mean, for someone who's, obviously this is kind of geared more towards someone who's kind of getting into the tournament fishing, but once you get to the level that you're at, how do you deal with the pressure? I mean, I know that you guys have worked so hard to get these points accrued and, you've built a reputation. How do you manage the last half of your fishing day when it really counts and, you're looking to each other to really make it happen?
Yeah, you really got to learn how to work with your partner as far as that goes. And it all comes back down to making a game plan.
Yeah.
Some other things, don't be afraid to go back to where you caught fish. Me and my partner, we had a tournament earlier this year, and it literally came down to we found fish 2 weeks before. I mean, they were way up in a creek, shallow, and I mean, something that we did, we should have went and found other spots, okay? And no, what we fished that, and we just kind of said, you know what, this is going to be what we do. And a cold front came through. We went up there. I think we saw one or two fish, and they weren't biting. And then we said to ourselves, "Oh crap, what do we do now?" So we fished a few spots. By this time, you've already burned a few hours, and anyone that knows bass fishing, you have a window in the morning, and then a late window, after lunch sometimes. And we ran a few spots, we caught a few fish, in a few other spots, but we noticed that some of the fish we caught were, better quality. So we just went back to one spot and we just picked it apart, and we slowed down. This is where it comes to, you might throw a reaction bait in there first. You're gonna get a few bites, and some people run away, they go and do something else. You can't be afraid to slow down and throw something that you can pick whatever it is apart. So what we were doing, we were fishing a ledge, and I let my partner throw a jig and I threw a Carolina rig, and we just hit it from all different angles, and we were able to salvage today.
Man, I mean, that's such great advice. I think time management in tournaments is especially something. Like whenever I first started out and I did a couple local tournaments, I was trying to understand like when I should move, right? So I mean, how do you say before the tournament, hey, let's focus on like maybe 5 spots? Do we hit every spot for like 20, 30 minutes? Do we, maybe go to a spot a little bit later? Like, I mean, I think that's such a consideration is, it's kind of cliche, but when to hold them and when to fold them, right?
Yeah, the fish will kind of let you know what you need to do, as far as that goes. So, something that I notice a lot, I like throwing a crankbait. Maybe last week they were eating it.
Mm.
And then you're fishing at that same color, same area, and then next thing you know, instead of you needing some pliers to get it out of their mouth, they're barely hooked. It's literally one hook, and you notice that you're getting some hookups, and then something happens, they let it go, or you'll see them chasing it up to the boat. So sometimes you need to either change color,
Mm.
change the speed at which you're reeling the bait in. Maybe it's a depth thing. So, or maybe you're just throwing the wrong bait.
Yeah, I think listening to your bites is such a big one. Like, it's so easy to put down a bait, and I've seen it before where I'm fishing. I think a perfect example would be like I'm fishing a Texas rig worm, and I flip it out there, and everything I've been doing in practice in this specific area has been fishing close to the bottom, maybe. And I realized that, like, during the day, something's changed. I'm not sure quite what has changed, but I've pull up to my spot that I'm putting all my eggs in this basket, and I flip out there and nothing. But then I'm reeling in and I get hit, and I'm like, okay, flip back out there, nothing. And so I start to try to piece together, at least in my experience, like, what does that mean? Does that mean that they're sitting up higher in the water column? Maybe they're a little bit more suspended, right? And so I think that, to your point, listening to your bites is so critical, and especially for someone who's new to it, I think that they may miss those things, those little cues that make the difference.
Yeah, and the next thing is you need to pay attention. How did that bite come? So what day, time of day it was, what kind of cover it was there shade on that cover, what's the water clarity, what's the water temperature. These things really come into play quite a bit. Bass, like to ambush their prey, so what they tend to do is they like to hang out in the shady side of, say, standing timber. You want to try to make that cast to the shady side of that cover. So those are some, and sometimes they may not bite. You need to make that fish react. So if sometimes we say this to ourselves all the time: if I'm not getting hung, I'm not putting it where he is. So take that crankbait, you need to bang it off the cover, or take it, your worm, you need to throw it where you don't want to throw it, because that's where the fish are going to be.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Everybody's trying to get cute with it, and they don't really realize that that's really what you have to do. That's where they live. One of the last things I think I want to talk about, I don't want to make this video too long, but, one of the most overlooked things, I think, in tournament fishing for someone who's new is fish care. So, I can just speak to a tournament that I had a couple years back where I was fishing by myself. I had so much confidence, and I went out and really just crushed it. And I brought in a 7-1 along with a few other fish, and I had by far the biggest bag out of all the teams I was fishing against, and they were teams. So I was so proud, but I came in and I pulled this fish out of the live well, and it was dead. And I ended up taking third place, and I made a little bit of money, but I couldn't get big bass. I couldn't get the winner, the full check. Like, it was devastating, and I think as anglers, part of our thing is conservation, right? I mean,
yeah, definitely. And you always need to remember, just check on the fish periodically. Make sure that your live well has a recirculating system, because they're defecating in there and they're choking on their own stuff. So that's something to always consider what time of year it is. So if it's really hot summer, put a bag of ice in there, and then whenever you fill that up, you need to get some sort of what is it, like a G juice?
G juice, yeah.
Put it in there. That way you can kill the chlorine. And remember, have it on recirculation and don't change the water out. All right, once you do that, you need to close your valve, have it on recirculation, and then try not whatsoever to reintroduce any outside water, because that right now you have the water at a cooler temperature, and those products basically kill ammonia. So that's what you have there.
Yeah, I think that's the big thing I think that he spoke to there was, like, just knowing where the water's pulling from on your live well. So when I flip the switch and I've had water in there that's been treated, that's at a set temperature, if I pull in a bunch of hot water, or there's a very definite temperature swing between what I'm pulling in off the surface of the water, because that's how the boat's sitting, you're pulling the water off the surface, the top layer, versus what's in there, it can shock the fish. And so that's a big one. But I think, to your point with the ice, if you do use the ice, you want to use like a G juice to neutralize that chlorine, because a lot of people don't realize they'll just throw ice in there and, there's a chemical component in there. But that's just so important, you know. I didn't really spend as much time thinking about it. You know, you had talked about paying attention to your live well. When looking back in hindsight, like if the fish are moving around in there a lot, maybe initially it's not a big deal, but if you hear them kind of banging against the top of the lid in there, there's probably something wrong. Or you should at least check on them.
Yeah,
You know.
definitely. You know, I wanted to touch on something. So, you know, you have people that going back to like cost of entry to get into this. You know, me and Clay, we used to work at Academy Sports and Outdoors, and you know, places like that, Cabela's, Bass Pro Shop, Academy, they offer really good combos. You know, for a very competitive price, and you know, something around $60 to $100 combo is really probably where you need to be looking. You know, and then look at, you know, getting a premium, not a top of the line kind of fishing line, but at least you know, a premium line, not a real low end line, just because you know anything can happen, but at least a premium line.
Yeah, the premium line, I think, you know, that is the connection to the fish, right? So you want to have sharp hooks and you want to have good line always. And a lot of times, like, I don't know, I just don't think you're paying attention to those things as much, and you don't recognize how big of a difference it is. Like a lot of line gets a lot of memory and it doesn't cast as well, and maybe you have breakoffs and all that, and you just want a really abrasion resistant type line, especially like you're saying, when you got to get back in there to where those fish live because they're in the heavy cover a lot of the time. Like you don't want that bite. It's hard enough to get the bite, right? So
Yeah.
you don't want to get in a situation where you break off and that's your tournament right there. That could have been the kicker fish, you know. So I think that's about all I have. I think those are all really good topics, and don't want to overload anybody. I know you can talk about tournament fishing for hours, but just some basic things to take away. Like we said, just, you know, preparation is important, sharing the information, you know, how to think about your approach with where you're fishing, you know, if you're dock fishing, maybe where you want to, you know, direct your cast, what equipment you're using. But I think that's all great information. I can't say enough how grateful I am to have you here with me. I mean, you have really a lot of experience with tournament fishing, and that's something I don't have. And so I've learned so much from being around you, and just super grateful, man. Thanks for being out.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Take care, guys.